Well, again, we welcome you to this session of the AgrAbility webinar series. We appreciate you taking the time to join us today. We're going to be talking about peer support, and specifically peer support for people with disabilities who live in rural and agricultural communities. We're thankful to have three different presenters today. Sierra Royster from APRIL, the Association of Programs for Rural Independent Living. Sherry Coatney from the Southeast Kansas Independent Living Center, and Rick Geringer from Wyoming Independent Living. For those that are not familiar with AgrAbility, we are a program sponsored by the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and we focus on issues of disability in agriculture. Every AgrAbility project is a partnership between a land-grant university and at least one nonprofit disability services organization. Currently, there are 20 state projects around the country. Our partners here at the National AgrAbility Project include Purdue's Breaking New Ground Resource Center, where I am located, also Goodwill of the Finger Lakes, APRIL, which we mentioned before, Colorado State University, and Washington State University. If you have any other questions about AgrAbility or would like to learn more, feel free to visit agrability.org, where there are a wealth of resources related to disability in agriculture. At this point, I'm going to turn things over to Sierra Royster. I know she was having some storm problems just a little bit ago, so hopefully we can get her connected here with no problem. If not, please just hang on and we will do our best to get going here. So I'll turn the presentation over to Sierra.
Hello.
We can hear you and see you.
Okay, perfect. Hi, everybody. Yes, hopefully we'll make it through. There was flickering just a couple minutes before of power right before we started, so hopefully the storm's passed. But thank you all for joining us today. I am excited to tell you a little bit, just a brief overview of what Centers for Independent Living are, and then our main service that we're talking about today, which is one of the many services that we offer, which is peer support. So for Centers for Independent Living, we have two on the phone today, the Southeast Kansas Independent Living Center and the Wyoming Independent Living Center, and both of them are going to share a little bit more about what that looks like to carry out this service there. But first, an overview of what is a Center for Independent Living for those that might not be familiar with it. So Centers for Independent Living are community-based. We review our local community, and we look at those services that are not being provided there and fill out in the gaps of where our services can be provided in that area. So it's going to look a little different. The services stay the same, but how they're carried out are going to look a little different center to center. We serve cross-disability. So anybody with a significant disability, no matter what type of disability, that could be mental health, that could be physical, that could be visual, that can be auditory, systemic, any of those types of disabilities, and more that I probably didn't even list, we work with those individuals. They're nonprofit organizations that are designed and operated by people with disabilities. So staff at a Center for Independent Living are people with disabilities, and that's a key portion for what we're talking about today. The majority of the staff and 51% of the board and management level are all people with disabilities. And peer support is one of the main reasons that centers were created in this manner. So CILs are unique in that they operate according to a strict philosophy of consumer control. So the people that we work with, we refer to them as consumers, and they are in the driver's seat for their services. They are the ones that tell us what goals that they want to meet towards independence, and they are the ones that tell us how they want to get there, what services that they would like to use to get there, what programs, what resources, and we are there to support them on that path. And so with saying that, the services that are provided are peer support / peer counseling. They're used interchangeably. Information referral, individual systems and advocacy, independent living skills training, and transition. And transition is actually a three-part piece. It's youth transition, so youth coming out of post-secondary education or out of secondary education, heading to post-secondary or career. It's people coming out of institutions and then assisting people from going into institutions, so diversions. There is about, and we say ish, 403-ish centers for independent living because there's new ones opening constantly and some, unfortunately, are closing down at times, so it stays around that number, and then 330-ish branch offices and satellites. So why do we do peer support? Why is that one of our services? I kind of hinted a little towards that of where we started, but peer relationships means relationships involving mutual support and assistance among individuals with significant disabilities. So those people that are pursuing those independent living goals, that want to grow their independence in a new manner, and by doing that, they are working with people that understand where they have come from or where they're going and can really support them along that way. And peer role models mean individuals with significant disabilities whose achievements can serve as a positive example for other individuals with significant disabilities. So I'm going to hit on this a couple of times, but those people that are working towards their independent goals, and they have reached some of those, and they are at that point that they are now ready to support somebody else that may have been in those same shoes that they were in, whether that be the same disability, whether that be the same life circumstance, all of those different things. So that's why we do it, is because we understand that as people with disabilities, we have a great gift to be able to share, that we can understand where somebody is coming from, but we also can understand the barriers and obstacles that happen along the way to striving towards your goals that you may want to be reaching. So why do we do it? In the law, where Centers for Independent Living are written, Rehabilitation Act, and under Title VII, we're told what our services must include. That cross-disability piece that we were talking about, so that's cross-disability counseling included. So that's where we're meeting with somebody and really talking to them. No matter their disability and no matter my disability, we're able to connect on some path. Independent living services included in peer counseling. So that one of those services is required to include peer counseling, which is synonymous for peer support in this manner. So programs are to promote the philosophy of peer support. The CIL shall promote the development of peer relationships and peer role models. And again, this goes off of where we started. We started with young people having some really great strides in their own life towards independence, and other young people with disabilities going, hey, how did you do that? How did you start that? What resources did you use? And that's really where a Center for Independent Living really got started, was that those relationships. And they said, hey, we could really do more with this. And through a lot of paperwork and a lot of other things, a Center for Independent Living was born. So that's where we really strive to make sure that that stays as a vital point of what we do as our services. And then it's required that we provide evidence of the peer support that we are doing and the peer relationships that are being created in our center with consumers and staff. And that is required in our annual end-of-year report. So not only are we required to do it, we also have to show that we're doing it. So it's something that centers are doing. And then now we know what we're doing, but why are we providing that? So we see that it's in the law, but what else? Why is that? That's where we started as a history, but why do we continue doing it? It's not just the disability community. It's not just the independent living community. We know that peer support model works. We see other communities doing it as well, other support groups doing it as well. We see AA and NA. And the other 12-step programs, they work with somebody that has walked in those shoes and can understand and provide that peer support piece. We see it with Weight Watchers. That's a huge one. That the leaders and Weight Watchers have to be somebody that has gone through the program and can speak from experience as they're leading other people through. The mental health community has a peer support program that they train people to be able to support other individuals with mental health disabilities. So we're not alone in knowing that this does work. So now we know why and how, or why, we're going to learn about how. So how do centers carry out peer support service? Let me jump back real quick to it's going to look different at every single center. So what our community needs locally is how those services are carried out. We're mandated to include the service, but how it's carried out is going to look different. So some centers do that on a one-on-one basis. Some centers do that on a group peer basis where they have group meetings and they understand that the people in that group and those peers have similar interests and similar goals that they're working towards. So peer support has to have a purpose and a goal. How was that relationship built? It has to have a purpose and a goal. So why are we working with that person? Why are we supporting that person? What are we working towards? And to go to the next one, it assists others in working towards independence. So the goals that are set are small, achievable things that work towards independence for that individual consumer. And they, of course, help set that up and outline what that looks like. So as all the services that we provide, this one is very vital to understand that we are carrying this out with empathy, not sympathy. This is not a place to say, oh, poor, pitiful you, you're in this horrible situation. Oh, I just feel so bad for you. As somebody that is coming from a situation that they have had to work towards goals, they have had to work towards independence in their own manner, in their own life, empathy is what actually comes with that service because we understand. So we may not understand that actual disability, we may not understand that actual barrier that they're dealing with, but we can understand the process of working towards goals and that process of achieving independence, and as defined as what you define it as that individual defines it. So we're there to help people help themselves, and that's a key piece. We don't do anything for individuals, so if they really need support to make sure that they're staying on their farm and that they're receiving their services at home and not in a nursing home, we don't go, okay, well, we'll set up the appointment, we'll make sure that all of your community-based services are notified, we're going to make all those calls, you just keep doing what you're doing. We're going to help them set up their own schedule of how are you going to make sure you get these phone calls met? How are you going to make sure that you're communicating effectively to those other services? And that's where we're helping them. We're giving them that support to know that they can do this, and this is how are some of the ways that they could be doing it. And if it doesn't work, we're still going to be there to be able to help them through that barrier as well. Confidential. That's very important. Everything we do is confidential. We do report it on our end-of-year report, but our individual conversations, as long as everybody is healthy and making safe choices, then everything is kept confidential within that peer support relationship. The big thing, too, when you're providing peer support and building those peer relationships is sharing those vital resources that create success. So what resources did I use when I graduated from high school that got me into college? How did I do that? What services did I use that were successful? Which ones did I not use? Was there other services that I could have used that I didn't know about, that I now know about, that I could share with them? Because it's not just the Center for Independent Living that's providing support, it's providing the resources to set up that support system. And that support system is how that person will be successful. So it's really just making sure that that information carries from one person to the next with sharing their resources. How are they carried out? So how are these services carried out? And it really varies consumer to consumer, staff by staff, and then program by program. So some are done by in-person, just when they're meeting in person, and some are done by phone, email, social media, listservs, online-only groups. For an example of like social media, how that would work, we actually, when I was at a center before, we had a chronic pain Facebook group. So with a group with chronic pain, it's very hard to meet in person on a regular basis because due to chronic pain, they often are missing appointments and those types of things. So in order to create that peer support relationship, we would talk about issues that we're having online. We would have our own private social media group, and we would, be in a tough situation, and somebody would post, hey, so I'm at this conference, my pain's at a scale of 10 out of 10, what do I do, how would you handle this? And then we were able to provide that support. So that's just one example of how that's carried across. Just an important piece here, they are not providing medical or professional counseling or therapy. This is just done on a peer support relationship. If it is needed for pure professional counseling or therapy, that needs to be done outside, and that could be added to those pivotal resources as well, though. Okay, so I know there's a lot of words in here. How do CILs carry out peer support services? So I talked about how they're done one-on-one sometimes, and then sometimes they're done through programs that are created to add volunteers or extra staff to just that one service of peer mentoring. So when it's done on a one-on-one, it's done as staff. So staff that are meeting with consumers and are those independent living specialists. Sometimes they're called independent living advocates, different titles, but as part of those services, if I'm working with somebody on independent living skills, peer support might naturally come through that work that I'm doing with them as I'm talking about those skills to have how to build those pieces to accomplish that next independent living skill. If I'm talking about finances and how do you budget, and they're really struggling with, I'm just not very good at this and it's not been successful and my family is really starting to suffer because of this, the natural peer support piece comes into that a lot of times. So it is done just on a one-on-one basis with the staff that are part of the disability community. When a person with a disability who has learned life strategies, that person has become a self-advocate and has reached some of their independent living goals and has learned how to live independently as they see fit, they're really great to be able to assist their fellow brother and sister, their fellow person with a disability, and whether that's the same disability or not. And I know I keep saying that, but to understand that barriers are barriers. And so if we can accomplish those, whether it's my disability or your disability, we can really kind of work together and understand that we've all kind of gone through that one piece. And that's when that person's really able to be a strong peer support staff. So when a person providing peer support differs from a counselor or just an advocate, so when does that happen? When someone is providing peer support, they don't tell somebody how to live their life. So we would never say that's right or wrong, you should do this, not that. We really want to allow that individual to share their options, talk about what they're thinking about, and then support them to finding their own path to success. And laying out, what are some of the options that happen with either one of your choices that you may be struggling with, but supporting them and encouraging them to receive, to keep receiving the services that they're wanting, or to keep working towards the goals that they're wanting to work towards, and those strategies of how to reach those things. That's where the peer support really comes in. And how is it different if it's a program? So an organized volunteer peer mentor program, it could be volunteer or it could be a paid position. Usually they're trained. They're supervised with people on staff. They are role models and coaches for other people with disabilities. And by that, they meet that second bullet at the top of this slide is they have learned from their own life strategies on how to be successful in their independent path. So they're one of those people wanting to give back and wanting to really work with somebody else. So this doesn't necessarily include the part-time staff or the paid independent living specialists or advocates. Those are people that are already on staff that are providing those services a lot of times too, and that's great. The program just adds to those supports. It specifically provides that one support to make sure it adds to it. It doesn't actually replace those independent living specialists or advocates. So that is really important to know that some centers are able to just add to it. So with talking about all these centers and how looks and why we carry it out, we're going to now hear from two great centers that are doing a lot of great things. So I'm actually going to turn it over to Sherry from the Southeast Kansas Independent Living Center, who is the CEO there.
Go ahead. Hi there. Can you see me okay?
I can hear you great.
Hi. There you go.
There we go.
All right. Sorry about that. Well, thank you for joining us today on this exciting topic about peer support and AgrAbility and how the two entities with independent living and AgrAbility should come together and make sure we're maximizing the support for people. So I'm going to talk to you about our experience here in Kansas. And so I play two roles. I happen to have both the role of being a center director for many, many years, but I've also, for many years, have been the co-PI on the Kansas AgrAbility project. So hopefully we'll have an opportunity to show how those two entities have worked together successfully in Kansas and hopefully be something that people can learn and build from. So first of all, of course, peer mentoring, which has been very clearly defined. It is best if people understand that it comes from people's personal experiences in any situation. Skill provides avenues for individuals with disabilities or health conditions to receive information through peer groups as well as individual mentoring, and that's been addressed on how that can happen. Topics and issues are definitely identified by the individual. We don't tell people, what to do or how to do it. We absolutely let them drive that ship. This is all customer empowerment, and that's learned through every aspect of what we do. So what can peer mentoring look like? We have several different ways, and I think that Sierra did a good job talking about how that can differentiate from situation to situation, but I want to go ahead and give you some examples in our shop how we do it. We have the CRO of Hope, and that's just what we call it, and that's a consumer-run organization. It's a group that they've identified trying to have their own identity. So they are a peer group of individuals with mental health issues, and they meet and provide advice and support for each other, as well as activities and opportunities to do socialization with the peer support. So I try to have some fun with it, and I think that that's good because they learn from each other and are able to master those issues that they have or overcome those barriers together through activities or through just being together and building that one-on-one relationship with somebody that has a similar situation. We have the Neosho County Coalition, which is really something that's developed in one county of our service area, and this is an advocacy group. So they meet and provide peer support around the barriers that keep them from having access to their communities or activities within their communities, and then they together help identify ways around those barriers or how to remove those barriers, and they've become a great resource for the community itself, which was wonderful, and they have a lot of peer opportunities to doing that. And then we have individual peer support and IL skills training, and many times those go together, so we use the IL skills training to bring people together. So we'll have a formalized kind of training that's going to happen. Of course, we try to make that fun always, but it brings people together in one common way, one they're all going to learn about whatever the topic may be, and it may be budgeting. Let's just take that as an example. So when they're learning to budget, they're also meeting people with similar disabilities that are clearly having issues overcoming a similar barrier. And as she said, Sarah talked about earlier, sometimes the peer support is with a light disability to people with a light disability, but sometimes it's because they have a light barrier. So that is an opportunity to, a way to address that. And when it comes to farming, obviously, many times it isn't the disability, it is in fact the barrier. And being creative, as we know farmers are, so having the opportunity to share ideas about how to overcome that barrier, things that have worked, things that haven't worked, and that's, can happen through peer support, and sometimes just through skills training, trying to, if somebody has a solution, so you use that solution as an opportunity to show others who have a similar barrier, maybe not a similar disability, but just a similar barrier. So I think we've talked about, different examples and how that can happen, but obviously it could be as simple as how somebody uses QuickBooks and a screen magnifier and being able to show that. And we'll talk a little bit here in a second about different ways we do show that to other farmers. So why peer mentoring is important in rural communities? Well, rural communities many times don't have all of the resources that they have in a more urban area. So again, rural communities become a little more creative about how we do things, and certainly the importance of sharing how you overcome a barrier is even more important. So I think that we need to remember that rural independent living centers are people with disabilities who live in a rural community. Therefore, they're residents in their local communities, and they know the resources and the possible solutions that have been addressed in their communities. This particularly is important if you're working with a farmer or a rancher, and you don't live in that area. So, as we also know, all of us serve people in rural communities, and we know that every one of those communities are a little different, and their culture is a little different. So it's real important to figure out how to use the resources or the people there in that community to be able to help us overcome those barriers and not offend anybody. So CILs provide a source of advice and IL skills training that many times when you're when you're achieving a goal to overcome a barrier, you'll realize there's another issue there. So when you realize that CILs can be a resource to help people not just overcome the barrier, but maybe even maximize their abilities within that situation. CILs have contacts and contracts with the local folks, and they know what about the people with disabilities and what services are available in the local communities. So we should always be using them as resources for us rather than trying to discover that ourselves. We need to partner together and utilize that information that they already have at their fingertips. The other thing, of course, is to know that not only do CILs have connections within the local community, many times, in fact, they are vital parts of that community, and they're the members of the church and the organizations, and so they are, in fact, that resource themselves. What's peer mentoring look like in Kansas? Well, Kansas AgrAbility has customers. Our demographics can certainly tell you about how our customers play out and what they look like. So we have 27% of our customers that have utilized our services were injured. Their injuries are, obviously spinal cord injuries are things people think about the most, but there's obviously amputation. A great deal of amputation seems to come up in working with farmers, as well as just orthopedic issues. 33% have chronic or neurological, neuromuscular disease. I don't know exactly how that with the census plays out to the rest of the community, but when you live in a rural state, that is the rest of the community for the most part. So the other, and that of course includes things like arthritis and MS, and obviously the beginning stages of Alzheimer's, which is our dementia that affects the entire population. The other issue, I hope you guys didn't lose visual on my screen. It looks like we lost visual, but I'm just going to keep talking until someone tells me otherwise. What do peer supports look like in Kansas? Well, we do some virtual things because I think it's hard sometimes to try to think that farmers are going to be able to stop what they're doing and always be able to go meet with another farmer. So you've asked two farmers to stop their activities. Now, listen, over a cup of coffee at the donut shop, you might be successful with that, or in some communities, it's the convenience store. Wherever the locals drink coffee, you might be able to get some peer support going. But to work on their schedule and to be more sensitive to them, we've set up virtual ways to draw some interest in that. And since the average person on our services is 51, we assume that they have more technology abilities than they used to when we first started this project. So we've developed some online supports. We have videos. So when a farmer that's working with us has overcome a barrier and been successful with their permission, then we'll video that barrier and then the solution to that and the success that farmer's having with that information. So that's been really successful and very helpful, and obviously not just available to Kansas farmers, but available to other farmers as well. We've, we just kind of collect little videos as we go as part of the staff's duty, and so when they get a success story that's really cool, or even just some simple little things, farmers are so creative, and there's things that, it blows our minds that, of course, that works. We wouldn't have thought of that. Too low tech for, some of the people who work in this field's brain. But we also, we play those on the website, have available. We also go out and do booths where there's farm shows or any place we can get ourselves in front of those, and we play those videos, the success stories at those opportunities, as well as with the permission of the farmer that we filmed. Sometimes we can just show them on the laptop to a customer one-on-one when we're working with them. So there's lots of ways to use that, and I'm sure there's more creative ways that haven't come up yet or that I'm not catching here. But the other thing is that we also use resources that have been sent from Purdue or in the Kansas AgrAbility Toolbox or the National Toolbox, as well as things that we hear from our national partners. And we post those on our website and make sure there's resource links to that and share those with our farmers. Direct Kansas peer mentoring opportunities. Kansas sponsors workshops and does demos. And we've had some really fun ones like recreational aspects, fishing and boating, hunting. We also, in Kansas, I'm sure, as most rural areas, have terrain that's not real easy to even for people like me to just walk across, let alone being able to use any. People would think that would be impossible. So we've used some opportunities to have some mobile solutions in rough terrain, and that does get some attention from folks, and they're more than willing to come out and play, or see what's going on. It does look a lot like play. We have a Kansas truck rodeo where we're able to give information out, and that again in itself is makes people want to come. There's actually a new commercial out about them breaking a truck like it's a horse, and that makes me think of the Kansas truck rodeo. But we also have an opportunity to show a lot of new technology and give people the ideas that are out there and share those ideas with others. We also do bus tours, which I know that happens at the national conference as well. So we kind of have taken that idea and broke it down into our own state, and we try to make sure that we are outreaching to veterans and active soldiers who have been injured, and as well as the farmers who are maybe interested in our program, or certainly others who have had success in one area and know that there's other options out there. But it's a great way for us to get our farmers who are successful to be able to share their stories and to build that natural relationship, because that's what it all has to be. It breaks really down into just that natural brother to brother, farmer to farmer, rancher to rancher kind of mentality. So this gives us the opportunity to introduce them to one another and see success. And then there's the peer mentor partnerships, where the Kansas AgrAbility staff and customers that are willing to talk to each other, then we make sure we mark that in the database so we know that they are. And when we see another farmer that has a similar situation, we offer that up. And I think they really would rather hear from another farmer than they would another professional. And no matter how much we try to look like the farmers and act like the farmers, there's going to be, when you're asking them to fill out paperwork or you're having to fill out intake information, you kind of reach that professional level, and you have to work hard to keep that beat down. So just offer them another farmer's name. Many times it's just the best thing to do. What else can CILs do for the AgrAbility projects out there? And I think that realizing it's not really an us and them, it's an us. And in our field, there are plenty of goals to be met and objectives to be dealt with. So working together just makes sense. CILs are focused on success, and I think so that attitude is a great reason why we should partner together. CILs vary from state to state, which was addressed earlier, and but those core services are the same. And I think that just realizing that there are people in rural communities out there providing services, certainly the services are going to overlap, and we just need to reach out to one another. CIL staff know the culture that they're in, and we talked about that a little bit earlier, that we need to realize that each of our rural communities have their own culture, and lots of different things feed into why those cultures are very different. But those local staff certainly know that culture because they're from that local area, and certainly can remove a lot of those barriers for us if we reach across the projects to each other and partner. We serve those populations, so we know those customers, and so again, many of our staff are in fact farmers. They grew up in the rural community. They grew up on the farms, so they know the farmers. They know the culture, and they might know the farmer because it's probably their neighbor. So I think that's important to know. We also are very aware of the local resources and assistance that is available in our communities. So don't reinvent the wheel. Go to the source and get information, and they can be helpful. Specific IL skills training can be provided. So again, you might be working with somebody about, now that they are an amputee, how they're going to get on and off the tractor. Maybe they also need some IL skills training just on how to get along in the kitchen, or how to transfer to the toilet or to the bed. I think that those things are going to be there, and we in nature are going to want to help figure out all those factors as well. But we could be partnering with the Independent Living Center to overcome those barriers together, and I think that would just make us stronger. And then just the youth, and the fact that we are now focusing in the IL world on youth. We have connections with kiddos who are involved in FHA and FFA and at the high school level. So I think that that's also a good resource. So that's all I have on my part of this. Again, I hope that I'm there and that everybody's able to hear my presentation, because on my screen I kind of disappeared, but that's okay. But I am really excited to introduce the next person who comes from independent living and has a background in AgrAbility as well. Rick Geringer has been around a long time, and so he is going to take it from here. Go on, Rick.
We can see you, Rick.
Okay, I did see myself come up on the screen. So, okay, so I am Rick Geringer. I'm with Wyoming Independent Living, and I work for one of two independent living centers in Wyoming. Mine's Wyoming Independent Living, covers the eastern half of Wyoming, and the other center, Wyoming Services for Independent Living, cover the western half. And some of you in AgrAbility may remember Corey McGregor. He is still with Western Wyoming Independent Living Center. And I've been with Wyoming Independent Living for going on 18 years in January. 10 of those years I was with AgrAbility when we had the AgrAbility program going in Wyoming. And we had it from around 2006 to 2015, and at which time Randy Weigel, who was our project director, retired at the university. So since then, nobody has taken over that interest or position to be able to keep AgrAbility going in Wyoming, but I'm hoping that someday we might get that revived again. So I grew up on a farm. I farmed for 25 plus years, and then I had the opportunity to work for an independent living center, so I've been there ever since. So in Wyoming is a state with a big part of the state's economy is agriculture. In fact, agriculture is around third after minerals and oil and tourism. And so in Wyoming, there are a lot of farmers and ranchers, and the farmers and ranchers are an independent lot. If you work with farmers or ranchers at all, they're pretty independent. They're not real willing to accept help. And if they are disabled, they don't really want to admit that. They just consider themselves as maybe having something that makes tasks more difficult, whether it's arthritis or something else. but they don't really look at themselves as disabled. They just feel like something happened where they need to just go ahead and keep going, and despite the disability. Farmers and ranchers aren't real open about sharing and opening up personal feelings, so that can be kind of hard when you're trying to reach farmers and ranchers with some kind of peer support. The other big issue, is there's a high rate of suicide among farmers and ranchers, and so the real importance of having some kind of help, some kind of peer support program going. And so Wyoming Independent Living, our mission is advancing independence, dignity, and a world without barriers. And that's something that could be, that's the same thing that could be applied to AgrAbility. And that's something that every farmer and rancher wants. Farmers and ranchers want to be independent. They don't want anybody telling them what to do, especially the government. And they have dignity, pride in what they do, and especially they don't want barriers to get into their way, whether it's getting onto a tractor and going out and planting or running a windrower. All these tasks that they face every day, they don't want to have a barrier that's going to slow down the operation. So in Wyoming, disability in Wyoming. A little of the background of Wyoming. Wyoming is least in population and 10th in size. Our density is around 5.8 persons per square mile. I think only Alaska is less than that, with about 3 point something per square mile. Compare that with New Jersey being the most dense. New Jersey has 1,191 people per square mile. So that's one reason why I kind of like living in Wyoming. I like my wide open spaces. Wyoming farms and ranches are huge in size compared to other parts of the country. Farms could be thousands of acres. Ranches could be tens of thousands of acres. When you're talking about how much it takes to feed a cow-calf pair in Wyoming, it may take anywhere from 17 to 35 acres to feed one cow-calf pair. So in Wyoming, our population is only 579,315. We finally made it to 500,000 not too many years ago. And of that, approximately 70,000 people have disabilities. And that equates to around 12% of the population. And of course, as you well know, disabilities can be visible or invisible. They can be physical, intellectual. They can be mental and emotional, medical. So disabilities come in many different ways. So with Wyoming Independent Living, we believe in equal access and participation for all. And again, that's something everybody wants, to be able to participate, especially those with disabilities. Sometimes they feel like they don't have the opportunities to be a contributing person in society. They have the talents, they have the abilities, but just barriers sometimes prevent them from contributing to the community. And they deserve to have that same opportunity that anybody has. I think of a girl years ago when AgrAbility first started in Wyoming. We had a lady on our advisory board, and her daughter was getting to be 4-H age, and daughter has cerebral palsy. She was in a wheelchair, and the mom was a real advocate for her daughter, that she went to the 4-H people, she went to the extension office, and said, my daughter wants to be in 4-H. What are you going to do to make sure she has the same opportunities as everybody else? And so they made accommodations. They made accommodations for the young girl so she could participate in the fairs and in the workshops, the judging, the camps, and she could be just as much a part of it as anybody else that was in 4-H. So we value the talents and contributions of all individuals. So peer support in Wyoming, what does it look like? Well, here's an example of where farmers and ranchers find peer support. It could be at a cafe in the morning, meeting together for coffee. And in this picture here, it looks like they shook the dice to see who's going to pay for coffee, and apparently it seems pretty obvious who lost the roll of the dice. So farmers and ranchers, they could feel uncomfortable being invited to a center like an independent living center and invite them to come to a peer group and receive support. If they don't know anybody there, the likelihood of them coming might be pretty slim. And so sometimes to reach farmers and ranchers, you have to kind of think out of the box. Where do they meet? Where do they feel the most comfortable? And it could be at a cafe, having coffee with other farmers and ranchers. And if you are able to break into that group, you could sure find a good group to be involved with, to be able to provide that support, provide information on what your center provides or the AgrAbility provides. So think out of the box. Where do farmers and ranchers feel comfortable? It could be at an implement dealership. It could be at an open house, at an auction, a farm auction or cattle auction, church. So just where do farmers and ranchers congregate, and where would they feel the most comfortable? We have a lot of small towns in Wyoming, a lot of miles between our towns. One person described Wyoming as one large city with long streets, and so you got to go a lot of miles to get to other towns, and a lot of miles to get to the farms and ranches to visit the person. I worked with another young man a few years ago who was involved in rodeo, high school rodeo, and he was injured in an accident, a horse accident, where he was left paralyzed from his neck down. And he came from a small town in Wyoming, population 200. And the beauty of small town USA, small town Wyoming, is when someone is having problems, having difficulties, had an accident, the whole town comes together for that person. And that's exactly what they did for him. So you get a lot of support in the community, the people of the community. Other places that seem to have good peer support are at conferences, at the National Training Workshop for AgrAbility. We have a conference in Wyoming called the Mega Conference, where people with disabilities get together. And so it just gives them a chance to come together and be around people that are going through similar situations and know how to make it through that situation. We have a program called Living Well with Disability and Working Well with Disability. It's put on by the University of Montana. They have workshop material, curriculum, and it's an excellent tool to work with a person with a disability to find out, okay, what can I do now that I have this disability? And the workshop helps a person to set goals, helps a person to beat depression, helps a person to get through the rough parts of life, and learn how to eat right, exercise. So just because a person has a disability doesn't mean that their life has stopped. They can go on living. Some of our bigger centers have activities at their centers where through the month there's different classes and things going on that a person can participate with. Here's a sample of some of our classes up at our Casper office. And some of these may not appeal to a farmer or rancher, but this is where I'd encourage AgrAbility folks to find out who their center is, independent living centers are, and maybe partner with them and maybe offer some ag-related courses if they can work it with the center. Maybe some of these times during the week that don't have any classes going, maybe you could offer a AgrAbility or agriculture related activity. And so Center for Independent Living versus AgrAbility. So we haven't had AgrAbility in Wyoming for several years now, but that doesn't stop me from still providing those services through my independent living center, because our philosophy is pretty much the same. We're both working at providing increased independence for the people we work with. So just a couple examples. In an independent living center, I might go out and coordinate getting a ramp put into a home, getting grab bars in the bathroom. Or when I was in AgrAbility, well, this is even after I was in AgrAbility, a farmer visited a farmer who couldn't get on his windrower anymore because it was too hard to step up that first step. And so we brainstormed and found an extended step we could put on his windrower with a rail on. And so now he was able to get up into the windrower and get out there and take care of the hay. So as an independent living specialist, I can still work with people in agriculture. In fact, there's a lot of people that Wyoming's an agriculture state, so it's a pretty common thing for me to work with people in agriculture. So next steps, this slide maybe pertains more to Wyoming independent living. Learn more about your Center for Independent Living, and we can provide that information to Wyoming Independent Living or contact your local Center for Independent Living. And I think Sierra will have a website where you can find out where your center is. Encourage your folks, encourage your people, AgrAbility, or on the farm and ranch, to talk to people that are about barriers, talk to the peers in their community, and be able to be in a situation where they can share their story with others that they might be able to help. AgrAbility has an excellent book called 25 Years, 25 Stories, 25 Years, 25 Stories, that came out when AgrAbility was celebrating their 25th anniversary. And so it's an excellent book that shows how 25 farmers and ranchers overcame the barriers and now proves to be an inspiration for others in agriculture. So at the bottom of that slide is my contact information. You're sure welcome to contact me, and I think that Sierra, like I say, will show you how to get in touch with your own Centers for Independent Living. So with that, I will turn it back over to Sierra.
All right, great. Thank you, Rick. So that was just an overview of two excellent centers doing a lot of great work within the agricultural community, the rural communities, and the independent living communities. So thank you, Rick and Sherry, for sharing that. Those were great. I do want to give you this website in the middle. It's the ILRU.org website, which stands for Independent Living Research Utilization. On there, you can go and find your CIL directory. You can click the map and click your state, and it shows you what centers are in your area. That way you can instantly connect with them. If you need any support with that at all, please know that you can reach out to me. One of the things that April is doing with the National AgrAbility Project is trying to create bridges for Centers for Independent Living and AgrAbility, whether you are a funded state or not, an affiliated state, or are interested in becoming involved with AgrAbility. All of those ways are things that we are trying to strive and help with. So if you need any assistance with that, please let us know. If you know that your center isn't providing that service and you're just not familiar with it or something and would really like some support yourself, please feel free to reach out to me as well, and I can kind of help with that process as well, and talking with your center on how that's being provided and ways that maybe you might have to add to that, or things that you see that farmers and ranchers could really use in the community, and a center might be able to plug in for that. The other reverse side of this is if you have a farmer or rancher that you're working with and they have really made some great strides and, have overcome some of those barriers and worked through them and are at a place of independence and maybe would like to support another farmer or rancher. Rick mentioned, those coffee house chats and those meetings. If they know another farmer that's there, they're more likely to show up. So, if that's something that of an individual that might be able to fill that gap, that is definitely something to reach out and say, hey, would you be interested in being a peer support for another farmer or rancher? That's something that also is needed as well. I just wanted to put a couple of resources up here for you for more information. Some of the information about how and why we provide this service as Centers for Independent Living are provided on the ILRU website, and there's training specifically on peer counseling/peer support. There's a center in Georgia that provides a peer support training program, so some of the information came from there. And then the Administration on Community Living, of course, provides a lot of those regulations on how we carry that out. And then an upcoming webinar that April is doing along with the ILNet, which is our other partners, ILRU, Utah State, and NICL, which is the National Council for Independent Living, are putting on a peer support bread and butter of independent living. So that might be some really great information too on what that could look like in a more broader scale for centers. So just some more resources for everybody. And I can turn it back over to you now, Paul.
Thank you so much to all our presenters, to Sierra and Sherry and Rick. Some excellent information. It's a topic that we know is important, but often we're not sure exactly how to get started with this. So right now, I'd remind you, if you have questions, please go ahead and enter those through the chat option, or you can use the raise hand icon, and we will do our best to enable you to ask your question verbally. While we're doing that, Sean Ehlers is compiling questions that have come in, and we're going to do our 4 quick poll questions. If you'd hang on for just a couple minutes and provide your feedback.
Yeah, so let me see. I don't know if I need this on or not. So do you see any dangers with social media support groups? For example, we've been concerned that someone might advocate an unsafe technology or practice. Do these social media groups need to be moderated before posts are made public? So I can speak from the one that we did but prior to, and you have administrators when you set up a social media group, and if you do it through Facebook, I can speak of, they have ways that you can approve posts before they're actually published, and so you can ask further questions or kind of get more information about those types of things if that's something that you're concerned about. And so there are ways to kind of monitor that to ensure that things are safe, or, you know, just not allow a certain post. But I can say, I mean, in my experiences, the different types that we've had have been successful, things that were untraditional but still safe and practiced, and was very helpful to the group. So making sure that you understand what they're posting before yay or naying it is always a good practice. But there are ways to do that if that's something you're concerned about. I don't know if Sherry and Rick have anything to that.
I think you covered it. It's really about having somebody that's kind of going to be monitoring that and figuring out. And the other thing is just posting the rules up front so people understand that it will be monitored, and that, you know, anyway, I think that we're not having real problems.
And I would just add, I think the benefits probably would outweigh any of the negatives. That you know, maybe a disclaimer: this is what worked for me, maybe not necessarily work for you. But then I think the opportunity to have people share what works for them, what doesn't, I think that would greatly outweigh some of the negatives that could happen on the social media.
I can read this one out. What type of training should peer supporters have? Some staff have expressed concern that peer supporters might make inappropriate, unsafe suggestions, particularly to people who might be depressed or suicidal. So one of the things that I used, and it's an option, it's definitely not a free option, but we have always used the Georgia peer support training we had gone through before as staff, and we had also done co-training or network sharing, if you would, with other mental health groups. So NAMI came in and kind of talked to us about the different options of depression, the signs of suicide or suicidal thoughts. So we had some of those, but Sherry and Rick can probably share more to that.
I think that people need to not take the word counseling too far, because in this aspect, if we're doing peer support about overcoming barriers on the farm, you know, I think the training needs to be much more about the fact that they are a farmer who has addressed barriers on the farm, and it realized it's not. If it was a mental health support group or mental health peer supporting, then absolutely there are trainings, that have been tried and tested to make sure that those peer support people understand, where their line is, and when people in fact need to be referred on to a professional. But we're particularly in this situation talking about peer support when it comes to how to overcome, lots of issues with farming. How do you organize your barn, or how do you overcome getting the cow panels, whatever. It's real specific to farming and those barriers that come into that. I'm not saying that depression or suicidal thoughts do not touch this population, because of course it does, as it does the entire society. But that's not particularly what we're talking about when we talk about counseling.
Yeah, and I would say too, we're just in the process of getting a peer support mentoring program set up at our agency, and have trainings. We'll have trainings for persons that are more full-time peer support mentors, and so just a one-on-one, getting a person connected with another person in a cafe or whatever at an auction. Those are some of those personal one-on-ones. I don't know how much. I don't know that I can't really see training for that type of situation, but I think for us, mostly the ones that are more, maybe more full-time type mentors, we will have training for them.
Okay, well, thank you, everybody. So this is the end of all the questions I've been sent, but I believe Paul may have received one other or two other questions through his chat. So I'll turn it back to him and let him verbally speak those.
Okay, thank you, Sean, and thank you to our presenters for answering that. Just a couple of comments. One was appreciation for Rick's pointing to social capital. He says, growing up on a family ranch on the Front Range of Colorado, we had no Center for Independent Living or even a Grange Hall. It was the Elks Club where people met, talked, and took care. So that's, I think, one of the things that we've found in Indiana is that more informal settings, as Rick mentioned, can tend to facilitate peer support rather than, advertising a peer support group that might, people might be reluctant to engage in something like that, where if it's something that's a little less formal, the peer support may actually be facilitated to a greater extent. One other question was on funding for accessibility projects, and I would like to point out, hopefully you can perhaps see my screen right now. We just added a funding assistance page to the agrability.org website, and if you go to either the home page, you can see there's a funding assistance link on the main menu. If you take that, you'll find this page where we've got a variety of different funding sources and suggestions, both from government sources and non-governmental sources, and related to both rehabilitation and to agriculture. Could be somebody that's incurred an injury and needs VR support or support from the Veterans Administration, or it could be a beginning farmer that's looking for land or ways to fund their operation, or it could be somebody with issues in both categories. So just, if you haven't checked that out, I'd suggest you do that. And again, feel free to look at other resources on that website. Well, we are a little bit past time. We thank you for sticking around, and we hope this was valuable to you. It certainly seemed to be some great information from our presenters. So again, thank you, Sierra, Sherry, and Rick. Thank you to all our participants. Thank you to Sean Ehlers for facilitating the technical aspects of our webinar today. Again, look forward to seeing you again. We'll be sending out information on our next webinar. Have a good day.